So yeah, this is my short story collection. It's called Mormonia, and it's a bunch of short stories with interrelated characters, and it's mostly set in Salt Lake City, hence the title. And I was trying to think of something to read. I think this actually has something to do with what Jason was reading earlier, but I saw this, does anyone read Ask Amy? This was in the paper yesterday. It actually has a lot to do with like the kind of stuff I write about, so I thought I'd read it. Dear Amy, my sweet 11-year-old son, who has started to hit puberty, confessed to me in a fit of tears that when I left him at home with my older sister, while I went to the store, he quote-unquote went crazy. He told me he drank a can of soda, restricted in our house. And then he Googled pictures of naked girls on the internet. It goes on from there. So the story I'm reading is about one of these kind of kids. I think he's about 13, so he's maybe a little bit more confused than this kid. And he's in love with the school librarian in his middle school. Or lust or something, I don't know. So, yeah, so we'll just start. Okay. She gestured stiffly toward a yellow classroom chair in front of her desk, a castaway made of molded plastic that must have had the effect of making anyone who sat in it feel immediately insignificant. As he settled into it, knees uncomfortably high, she took her seat behind her desk, a grown-up seat piled with an airy black cushion that emitted a gentle wheezing sound. Schott pulled her glasses downward and then appeared to examine him more closely through her lenses. The smooth, unperturbed skin above her eyes promised the vague hint of an excitable vein on her forehead, hiding just below the surface. One Miles imagined jumping out in bas-relief whenever a book was overdue and a late fee assessed. She turned her attention to the letter, which she then began to read out loud once she'd cleared her throat against the back of her hand. To whom it may concern, as Miles' legal guardian and mother, I herewith give my full consent to allow Miles Wright complete and unfettered access. She stopped and looked over at Miles. Oh, this is good. My friend was grinning. He enjoyed the serious-mindedness of words like herewith and unfettered. The latter being one he discovered and settled upon after lengthy consultation with the dictionary. Ms. Schott, however, was strictly business. After a beat or two, she cleared her throat again and continued to read. I herewith give my full consent to allow Miles Wright complete and unfettered access to all of the pornographic materials on the second floor. Sincerely, she looked up. Sorry, I can't read this. She pointed to the signature, suppressing what appeared to be a giggle. Beatrice Wright, Miles offered. My mother. Ms. Schott stared down at the page and then up again at Miles. He was fidgeting, leg falling asleep, finding it difficult to maintain the sort of grown-up composure he thought the situation demanded. An encore performance of Van Halen already taking center stage. If this doesn't stop soon, he thought, I'll have to slap myself. Is there anything you want to tell me about this? She said. There wasn't. Look, it's obvious to me you wrote this. An uncomfortable silence followed. The vein on her forehead emerged in all its glory. It was better than he'd expected, and he was now more smitten than before, if that were possible. You know how I know? Before he could answer, one of the bottom drawers of her filing cabinet screeched open, and she produced a 4-inch thick binder, which she let fall with a spectacular whelp against her desk. Take a look, she said, gesturing toward the folder. Miles tentatively reached for it, making sure to keep one hand at his side at all times, as if he were seated on a roller coaster, which was exactly how he felt. And sure enough, as soon as he had fondled the bulging file, she reached out and slapped him like a schoolmarm. He quickly yanked it back to safety. We look with our eyes, Mr. Wright. He nodded. Sorry, I can't really let you look, she said. It would be a violation of the other student's right to privacy. He felt his eyes water. She held his gaze, and her smirk widened until he could see the enamel of her top row of teeth, and then playfully, she ever so gingerly swiveled the folder toward herself, as if it were a rare book in need of mending, indeed, a book he might hope to encounter on the second floor of her library. She opened it tenderly and began to examine its contents. I'll skip ahead a little bit here. So she detains him for a while, and he finally gets out of the room and runs away. On his way out of the library, he stopped at the foot of the stairs. He looked up, could almost see the top. After all he'd endured, printing the note, getting it signed, surviving Schott's inquisition, he felt suddenly he'd earned the right to go up there. So he began to climb. Didn't even look behind him to see whether Ms. Schott or any of her henchmen or henchwomen were lurking nearby. Screw you, Smelly, he kept on walking, counting each step as he conquered it, as if it were at last his birthright, as if he had always been someone who'd gone to the second floor, as sophisticated and worldly as Arnold, say, or Ms. Schott, or whomever it was who'd preserved this precious collection. He felt that if he walked in such a way, head held high, no one would question him or his right to be there, and no one did. After 25 steps, he reached the summit, felt like Sir Edmund Hillary on Mount Everest, and like him, discovered the air up there was too rarefied. Became overly conscious of the workings of his diaphragm, his seeming inability all of a sudden to get enough oxygen. Standing boldly at the top of the stairs, wheezing in spite of himself, wondering where he'd placed his inhaler, Miles surveyed the second floor. He wanted to know where he could go to find the most objectionable materials first, in case his time up there was limited. The floor was mostly empty. A couple of couches, some oversized books on a single oak coffee table covered in white ringlets. In the farthest corner, a few gunmetal gray stacks, presumably lined with all the filth he'd so long fantasized about. He headed there immediately. When he arrived, his heart was beating like a hummingbird's. He felt the pure pleasure at last of his mischief, knowing he was somewhere he wasn't supposed to be, doing something he shouldn't be doing. He suspected soon enough he'd be caught, the natural order of things restored, and everything he'd fought so long and hard for unfairly stripped away. So he had to be quick. Ducking between two stacks, he began to greedily scan the books nearest him, paws fondling bindings faster than he could read them, touching hungrily in search of sustenance like wild honey. But he was having a hard time finding anything objectionable enough. The sagging breasts of a gaunt African tribeswoman on the top of a stack of National Geographics seemed to be about the most provocative thing in sight. And not that he was a racist or anything, but it wasn't doing much for him. Not after having recently gazed at Schott's and Smelly's more proportionally sized Western chests. No, most of the books looked like medical texts. They were oversized holdings, nothing particularly prurient or dangerous. He ran his index finger down the spine of each row, desperation fused with locating something suitably vulgar, something to finally give release to his many months of pent-up frustration. Any title at all that would have the effect of redeeming the entire venture. And finally, toward the end of the last stack, he found something that seemed promising, a book called Our Bodies, Ourselves. He looked both ways, plucked it from its place, peering longingly at its shiny cover. It was yet again some kind of medical text. He flipped through its pages to confirm the suspicion, found there were enough illustrations to arouse him, if only mildly. There was a drawing of a woman giving birth, and on another page, a different woman, fingers spreading the flesh between her legs. He coughed awkwardly, adjusted his underwear. The pictures were too detailed, too realistic. A caption below, too much fucking explanation. He felt his head moving in waves, arms shaking, the whole upstairs reading room warping. He came across 2 pages stuck together, wondered how that had happened, tried to peel them apart because he knew what they contained would be what he had been looking for all along. But he became distracted by a noise. Someone had entered his periphery. Approaching from the stairs, he looked up. It was Miss Schott, bearing down on him with her grape green eyes. He thought he might faint. She was no more than a few yards away now and closing the gap quickly. She stopped dangerously close. Her breath smelled like peppermint. Her smile was so wide he could see lipstick marks like berry stains on the enamel of her gapped teeth. "Find everything you're looking for, Mr. Wright?" "No," he stammered. He felt like a cornered animal, dropped the book he was holding. They both bent over at the same time to pick it up, nearly knocking heads. It was as close to a woman as he'd ever been. Anyone, that is, but his mother, and she didn't count. Their eyes locked, and he didn't dare move, and she didn't move either. He was so close. He could see the pores of her cheeks. He could look up her nostrils and down her blouse, but he didn't. He didn't blink. He didn't look away. There was something unexpectedly gentle about the way she was looking at him. Her irises were swirling, and as she reached out and patted him tenderly on the shoulder, she said, "Are you okay, Miles?" He stared at her vacantly, liked the way she said his first name, hoped if he remained silent she'd say it again. He slowly leaned into her, and she didn't turn away. He didn't disgust her, not completely. He wasn't disgusting. She held him, patted him on the back of his neck. Her palms were cool. Her hands smelled like lotion. He wouldn't cry, he wouldn't suck his thumb, but there was a part of him that wanted to revert to being a child, if only for a moment. It had been a kind of Garden of Eden childhood, a place without knowledge of good and evil, and unfairly he felt he'd been cast out of it forever. "Everything is going to be all right," she said soothingly, even though she must have known it was a lie. After some time had passed, he could hear each shallow intake of her breath and felt her warmth against his neck. "You'll get out of here," she said. "You will." At that, he pulled back and looked at her again. It was as if he were seeing her for the first time. "Why don't you?" he asked. She merely smiled and winked, and then he felt his knees knock as she leaned in and kissed him chastely on the fuzz of his right cheek. He blushed, pushed away, clambered up, and started down the stack. It was too much, too soon. His head was churning with every little thing. When he looked over his shoulder again, he was already at the staircase. He could see Miss Schott bend down to pick up the book he'd abandoned. Our Bodies, Ourselves. What a stupid title! He was frozen there for an instant, speechless once more, afraid to breathe, and he allowed himself to enjoy that small and rather defining moment for possibly more than it was. The way the fabric of her wool skirt tightened as she bent down, knees joined together, taut calves covered in dark nylon, the radius of her ample ass presenting itself, so it seemed to him like some kind of a gift. Then he heard an emission, a kind of high-pitched squeal, almost as audible as a gasp. He wasn't even sure where the noise was coming from, inside or outside of him. He felt that in that moment he might at last be losing it completely. He fell back against the brick wall, gripped the solid metal safety rail like an iron rod. He was sure he was going to have an episode, black out like he'd done once at the mall. Too much excitement. But he didn't. Still had the present thought to wonder what it would be like if he had. Would he tumble down the stairs? Would all the students laugh at him? Would Schott come to his rescue and revive him with a kiss? A real one this time. His face was burning. Miles Wright hurried down the stairwell and ran toward the exit, walking straight into the glass-walled atrium. The commotion, once he smacked head first into the glass, was so loud it rang out like a bell throughout the library. We all looked up at him. Some of us were even giggling. Miles looked dizzy, didn't know what to do, but kept on going, waving once he had found the exit, a broad sweep of his arm like an astronaut or a politician. He led with that bulge in his pants, right out into the nave. Outside, he stopped and turned around and looked up. We followed his eyes, and we could see Miss Schott leaning over the balcony. She had come to make sure he was okay. She was smiling, and when he grinned back at her, she waved. Thank you.